Hey gang, Kevin here, Life22, and it has been a hot minute since we've been in the studio. We've got a lot going on, just figured I'd give you an update. We're almost at the tail end of All Family August, transitioning from All Family August into September, which is back to school September. And we're coming up on that, and we'll do the podcast on Monday, which is Labor Day. I always screw the two up. So anyways, before I head off for work for the day, I wanted to touch base with you guys on some updates, and I know we're going to have some breaking news later this evening, most likely, if my sources confirm. And with that said, it's just, most of you guys are like, why has Kevin not been on doing these podcasts so consistently? Every time he does one, it's comedy gold. We love them. We love them. We love them. Sorry to do a Trump moment on you, but, they're the greatest podcasts of all time. No, I'm just kidding. But we do, I do have something serious to talk to you guys about. I don't know if any of you saw my most recent podcast where I was kind of griping about property rights. And my heart goes out to the Wade family. My heart goes out to the Wade family, or the Green family. Wade was an auto detailer in his in his neighborhood for the last 5 years. During COVID, I remember being an alderman. I remember people like, what do we do for work? What should we do? We're being forced to stay home. We should work from home. Their employers are telling them to work from home. Anytime you work from home, according to our zoning law, like, you should have an at-home business. It doesn't matter if you're a W-2 employee or somebody else, then that employer should be rezoning your house on your behalf to be an office. All those stay-at-home moms that were like, because crafting became a big thing, because you weren't allowed to leave your home. So there's a lot of people that bought Cricut machines. My wife had been doing Cricut machines for years, and it's just funny that, I have some commercial space that she can operate out of. Does she do some of it at home? Like, she no longer does it. I think I briefly talked about this. Legally, according to our zoning code, she could be fined every day that she was making crafts at home, even if it was, because she went to sell one of them. I don't know why there's an excerpt for a yard sale then, if they're going to hold strict to these measures on business, on different businesses and stuff. Like, hey, if you're a business and you operate and you sell anything from your home, you have to be rezoned. If you're in, residential, you have to go in front of the zoning board. There's just a whole pile of things that just have to be done according to these zoning laws. And that's why I don't believe these zoning laws are constitutional. I've talked to a few lawyers. Well, the Supreme Court has ruled on them. Well, that's great. Except for the fact we have this Constitution that says, we are going to limit, these are all the powers that different people have. You can add a bunch of laws, but every so often we should reset them, because we really shouldn't have more than 50 laws across the country. And all of a sudden now we got 2 bazillion laws, and everyone's like, oh, but that's just the way things are. It's like, no. They even say in the Constitution, you should not be doing this. You should have very limited laws. We have to tweak this law. Okay, well, that's acceptable. Thou shalt not murder. Okay, we have all these murder laws, and we have to critique them. Well, is this murder? Is that murder? Is this negligence? And then we kind of expand on the law to make it work. But we shouldn't be adding a bazillion laws. And all of a sudden it's because America was founded so that you could do whatever you wanted within reason. And that within reason is supposed to be the tiniest little portion. It's I can do whatever I want, but I can't murder somebody and infringe on their rights in that regard, right? And that's what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a gray area, and it's supposed to be a very tiny one. You're supposed to be able to do whatever the hell you want. You want to walk down the street? You want to walk down the street with no shoes on, and they have a law that says you have to walk down the street with shoes on? Where the hell in the Constitution does it say that you can't walk down the street without shoes on? Well, they gave that power to the state, and the state decided that people should be wearing shoes when they walk down the street. Who cares, man? Let them get ringworm. That's on them. I don't know. People are just nuts. This is nuts. This is, it's crazy. But now all of a sudden, you've got this board that just, told this family that they can't, they can barely make ends meet with both of them trying to work full time. He can't work after hours. The one thing he's good at is, he details cars for a living at his 9-to-5 job. What happens when that dries up? He's not allowed to do it at his home. They completely denied him. They said, well, they went back and forth on if they should give him restrictions. They talk about how, the people that show up give more weight than the people who don't. And then they hemmed and hawed the entire proceeding about, well, what about the people who didn't show up? Well, if they hold less weight, they almost don't exist. They exist because they filed a complaint. But if they don't show up, it's almost like we should take that as a negative against it. So it's almost like those people are in for it because they didn't show up. And then it's like, you have these rules that you say things like that. And you say, if you show up, that's going to, like, if one person shows up and 100 people don't, we're going to take that one person at a good 50% of the ruling. And it's like 30 people showed up. And everybody was in favor of them. There was one couple that I know and I respect, and they just, they said, if he could just not do it after 9 o'clock at night. They were like, other than that, everything's fine. And they were willing to make concessions, and they were willing to do this, and they were willing to do that. And it's like, yeah, but what about all the people who didn't show up? It's like, there's 4 more neighbors in the entire neighborhood who didn't show up. And I actually spoke to a bunch of them that were around the corner that actually also got letters, and they were like, oh, if we'd known, we would have done it too. Because, like, we appreciate him and all this other stuff. And it's like, okay. But, so now the government's gotten involved, which it shouldn't be. So now, all of a sudden, what happens when their rent payment or their mortgage payment or their tax payment doesn't get made because they can't cover their bills with how much they are currently working? You just took away, like, with this, they can do that, and they can buy their kids a Christmas gift. They can buy their kids birthday gifts. Without this, they can't do that, and they fall behind on their bills. So the government just stepped in and just told somebody that they can't work. So now he's got to go, like, leave his house at night to go work a night security job or something just so that his family doesn't end up homeless on the street. That is ridiculous. And he's a father like me, and we will do whatever we have to make to help our family survive. But, like, in a situation like this, I hope that they take this right to the Supreme Court and sue the Christ out of the governmental entity that caused this. Like, to me, it's like so if those, like, if I go out in the morning and I stand in front of your car to prevent you from going to work and then you lose your job, like, I should be held responsible. Like, oh, well, you had the right to stand on the street. Like, and I get that right. And then we'll go down this rabbit hole where I'm trying not to sound like a hypocrite here because I have the right to stand in the street. But if I'm also, like, my actions also have consequences, right? Like, I have free speech rights, and I also have to understand the ramifications of my speech. And the issue with that is when you turn around and you say, hey, I'm going to impede your ability. Like, I have the right to stand in the street, which also caused you to lose your job at work. And now you can't make ends meet. And now you're out on the street homeless. And then eventually, like, you've been giving all of your food to your kids, but then the food runs out. And then your kids starve to death. As a parent, I'm coming after you. Like, that's my mentality, because you just starved my child to death. Like, that's it. Like, I mean, oh, he could go get a different job. Like, no, that shouldn't be. This is what he likes to do. This is the American dream. You should be able to do what you like to do and make money at it and be able to prosper and be able to survive. And there's where the in limits come in, because I'm sure some of you are like, well, what about the drug dealers in your neighborhood with your neighborhood watch? Like, yeah, okay, so they really like doing their drugs and all that other stuff. Okay, well, that's part of the parameters that fall into that small category of don't murder, because that's essentially what drug dealers are. Drug dealers are murderers. They're handing drugs out to people knowing that, like, especially with this fentanyl stuff, like, they know, and they're adding fentanyl to it, and the customers are begging for more fentanyl so they can get closer to that high, that closer to the death. They're like the guys who choke themselves, like, the closer they can get to suffocating and then come back to life. That's where they get their high. That's where they find it. And so my biggest issue is, like, all these people and just where they're thinking, like, man, like, you, like, that's a completely different argument. And I'm playing devil's advocate against myself. I know no one's brought it up yet, but I'm also constantly criticizing myself to make sure that I don't come across like a hypocrite. And sure, I will. Sometimes. Everybody does. Everybody's a hypocrite to a degree, right? But there are parameters in place for this stuff. If you're impeding someone's ability to go to work, like you specifically just said, you cannot work. You just said that. Well, I mean, what? Like, I'm trying to wrap my head around it. Like, if that family becomes homeless, loses their house and their home and everything, I think that the government entity should be held criminally responsible. That's like, it's ridiculous. And then the if, you know, and I know a bunch of those people on those boards, and I know they're just trying to do the right thing, and they were juxtaposed into a position. They said, hey, you want to do this? Like, yeah, I'll give back to my community. And they don't realize that, like, I was raised in a society where zoning was acceptable. The problem is that zoning was a farce that was shoved through by one political party over another, or a group of people that said, well, I should have the right to infringe on other people's rights, and then nobody had an issue with it, and then it got through. But the problem is it shouldn't have existed. Like, I think I should be able to murder people, and we have this giant murder board. You just submit who you want to have murdered. It's the same thing. It's an infringement on people's rights. An infringement on someone's free speech rights is the same as an infringement on their life itself. That is it. Because if you have the right, if we are willing to send, like, if we ran out of soldiers, and I've gone over this argument in the past, if we've run out of soldiers to send to war to go fight, eventually we start drafting all the able-bodied males, and then eventually we start drafting the women and the children, because essentially, like, if you're losing a war, it is us or them, and that's how it works. And so what ends up happening is you end up, like, you would, to the point that you would have a population of 0 is when you win or when you lose a war officially. And so, like, if for freedom and free speech and our constitutional rights, if we're willing to take population 0, which is the parameter of the United States, we as a populace will defend our freedoms, our beliefs, and our constitutional documents to our end, to the point that we don't exist anymore. Then that would be the inevitable conclusion when you walk down that path. And that is, I don't understand why people can sit there and say, well, like, well, if we're willing to do that, but then all of a sudden inside of our own government, we've got this cancer that says, oh, we can tell people they can't have a yellow house. No, the moment that you tell somebody that they can't have a yellow house in a certain neighborhood, or they can only have a certain color house in a certain neighborhood, is the moment that you've pretty much just accepted that, like, also murder is acceptable. You know, we can choose and infringe on anybody's rights in any way, because once you do it once, you can do it whenever. And so what I'm saying is you need to backpedal. You need to realize that this entire system is flawed. You need to realize that it needs to be overturned, and it needs to be just abolished, and then we can go back to being a free America again. I say you take a small town like Olean, New York, and you try it, and you say, hey, let's get rid of zoning. What the hell, man? Why? What, you know, oh, hey, somebody wants to build a garage. Somebody wants to do this. Well, you can't have 2 garages on your property. Who gives a shit? It's my property. I can do what I want. My house could be all garage. I'd turn my house into a garage. Be like, oh yeah, no, I live in the basement, and I've got 4. It's an entire 3-story car garage. You know, like, that's, I could do that because it's America. It's nuts. And I think it needs to be overturned. I think all of this stuff needs to be overturned. I think that the people that sit on the board should realize that, wow, okay, I did not, you know, Kevin brings up a very good point. I did not realize that this is a grave injustice against humans and the Constitution and what we stand for as Americans. And, you know, wow, I'm going to step down. I'm going to work with guys like Kevin to abolish this travesty in law and be able to, yeah. So, and I also don't want any part in being held criminally responsible when one of those kids starved to death. You know, he'll probably make it work, but the problem is that you've just caused him to go down that road where he potentially couldn't. You're literally pulling food out of his kids' mouths. And I say literally because that's what you're doing. As soon as you stop somebody from going to work, as soon as you make them lose their job, that's why cancel culture is such a hideous thing. Oh, I'm going to cancel you because blah, blah, blah. Like, and to the lady down the street, like, you know, part of going to the zoning board, did the neighbors complain to the person? You're supposed to complain to the person, and then you can go to code enforcement. And then when code enforcement has no remedy, then it gets to the zoning board. And that, like, I don't even think any of that shit should exist, except for the neighbor who has an issue goes to the person. The one person who caused all this didn't even go to the person. You don't get to be passive aggressive in this world, because guess what? You were the accuser that caused this. You're the one who has to stand up and face them. And if you don't face them, then your argument means nothing. And that's what the Fifth Amendment, that's what the whole thing is for. If you don't have the right to, if you're not going to publicly accuse somebody, or if you are going to publicly accuse somebody and you're not going to stand behind it, then it means nothing. It means nothing. I spoke with somebody the other day about how people take these arguments, and or they'll take, like, the same way if you don't show up to the meetings, like, they don't hold any weight to it. They also don't show, like, if people like write a letter, like, I think my Uncle Joe should get out of jail and blah blah blah. Like, okay, great. And then when it comes time for his probation hearing and his parole hearing, and you don't show up, like, that piece of paper means almost nothing to the system, because you weren't willing to show up and actually, like, stake claim and put your name down that this person deserves to get out. And one of the people I've been speaking to also talked about that happens all the time with, like, pedophiles trying to get their stuff dropped, and it's like you have, oh, well, this person was joined our church and they're super nice, and it's like, but then when it comes time to it, that letter, they don't show up. And I don't blame them, because I wouldn't show up either, because I also think that there should be ramifications if you do show up, because the same way that your word means something, it also means that you have to, if you showing up means more, then you also have to take on the responsibility of what that more means, if that makes sense. If you are taking on this reality that that you standing up means more to that holds more weight, you also have to handle the weight of that responsibility that you've just insisted on. So the insistence on the fact that you want to have you want this pedophile to get his charges reduced, or wants him to drop off a registry so that people don't know that he had past crimes, or get it knocked down to a lesser crime, or lower himself on that chart, or be able to live within so many distance of a school. If that person relapses, or your Uncle Joe's a Stabby Joe is what they used to call him, you know what I mean? And you just, you got him out on parole, and then he stabbed somebody else. I think you should also be held part responsible, because you got this person out when the system was working as intended, and it protected the rest of us from these people that should not be functioning members of society. I think as soon as you open your mouth to do that, I think that, like, you need to put your money where your mouth is. And I think that you need to start seeing some charges for that. The same way that actions have consequences, the same way this board is about to starve to death a family, the same way that the neighbor who made a complaint wasn't able to back it. I think if she stood up and said, this is my issue and blah, 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 and I don't think you're allowed to be a pussy and not tell people what you think. And if you do, then, your opinion at home under the covers, you hide under your covers and you speak your own opinions to yourself in a little echo chamber of comforter. It's great. You have that right. But the problem is that it doesn't hold the weight. This is how the gravity of the world works. It doesn't hold any weight if you're not willing to publicly speak it and not hide under the covers, and you have to say it so everybody can see you. That's why I'm now a big proponent of marriage. You stand up in front of all your friends and family and state, this is the person I'm spending the rest of my life with. I love this person. I'm not going to, I'm not going to have any infidelity towards this person. There's just a ton of things like that in our world that hold more weight. And when you're not willing to do things like that, you're not willing to make those sacrifices. I can't remember one of the founding fathers. I think it was Federalist Papers. It was, I think, Thomas Jefferson, maybe. I'll have to double check this, but your rights mean nothing without duty. So if you don't have the duty, the integrity, the moral strength and fortitude to hold through and, hold yourself to a higher standard, to defend women, children, families, to protect your marriage, to protect your God and your country, then your rights mean nothing. So you can sit there and say, I have human rights. Well, what does that mean if you're just a lazy good-for-nothing that just shoots heroin and just OD'd on the street? Well, I guess your life means nothing to you, so why should it mean something to me? And that's really what it comes down to. That's my interpretation of that duty, just to one degree of it. I've gone on a pretty long rant this morning, but I think it was well worth it. So my heart goes out to this family that, and it's, like, now, because all of a sudden now it puts upon people like me, right? Because now I'm going to do what I can to help this family out so they don't starve to death, because that is the duty that I feel to my community. Somebody who's just trying to work and do hard work and do the right thing. And then people who, run illegal counseling centers out of their home, right up the block, just because they didn't get a zoning permit to re-permit their, well, mine doesn't have a pressure washer. I'm just giving a devil's advocate for For an argument, I'm sure that person would make, I don't make noise. Well, tough noogies. Tough noogies. A business is a business. That's how you went at them. Live by the sword, die by the sword. That's how it works. So I'm livid because I'll end up doing what I can to help this family survive. And I know there's a bunch of other people in that neighborhood that will do the same. It is just ridiculous that things like that happen. We have more important crimes to be fighting. It's just like everywhere across the country, we're short officers since the 2020 riots. Nobody wants to be a cop anymore. And it's like, and then New York State comes through and they harbor people, they tie people's hands behind their backs on actual crimes. And then like the government resources are still in place. And they're like, well, we got to go after somebody. Let's get the poor kid who's detailing cars in his driveway in the evening and on weekends, every other weekend. Like he's doing what he can, man. This is my follow-up gripe. So, all right, gang, I'm sure we'll still have breaking news, like I said earlier, later this evening, and we will talk to you guys next time on Life 22.